Hey guys, so welcome back to Managerial Finance. We're in Chapter 3. This is Homework 7, and the purpose of Homework 7 is not to compute ratios because we've already computed the ratios that we're going to be looking at. The purpose is to interpret the ratios, and we're going to interpret the ratios that we have calculated in the previous homeworks using two types of analysis. One is trend analysis, which is looking at the same ratio for the same company over an extended period of time to see what has happened or what is happening to the ratios over time. It creates context. The second type of analysis we'll do is peer analysis, where we will compare the ratios for one company with the same ratios for another company that is in a very similar line of business, so that we can better understand how each company is doing. Okay? So with that said, let me circle around here, make sure this thing's on. Yes, it's working. And we've got a page, an Excel page full of ratios. So the first question is, which company has better liquidity? And so we've got two companies, ITT and ITW, and they're in the similar business. And we're going to measure liquidity using the current ratio. Okay? We've decided to use current ratio, which is current assets, total current assets divided by total current liabilities. And right now, which company is more liquid is going to be ITW, because their current ratio is 2.34 and ITT's current ratio is 0.95. So the answer to the first question is ITW. The higher this ratio is, the more liquid a company is. And again, keep in mind that moderation in everything. You don't want this to be too liquid, because remember that you earn your lowest returns on liquid assets. So you want to have the right amount of liquidity, adequate liquidity, but not too much liquidity, because you want to earn returns, and you don't earn a high return on liquid assets. All right, the second question is, which company has improving liquidity? Okay, so let's look at the trend. So the trend in the current ratio for ITT starts pretty low, has a nice jump up, which is good. Another nice jump up. Now they're above 1, so that's good. But then it goes back down. So it looks like this number here is kind of an outlier. It's really low. And this number here is kind of an outlier. It's really high for this particular company. So it looks like somewhere around 1 is going to be probably what they're shooting for. So they're playing it pretty close. They're not giving themselves much margin. And this number bounces around quite a bit. So we're not feeling really secure about this number. Now here we've got 2.1 for ITW. Then it jumps way up to 2.48, higher to 3.21. Now it's interesting to me that both companies had their peak in liquidity in 2016. So that indicates to me that something might be going on in their industry. And their low point was in 2014 for both companies. Something may be going on in their industry that is affecting their liquidity. We need more financial information to determine that. Okay, and then it goes back down to 2.33, which is still very safe, safely above 1, much higher than ITT, but again, it peaks in 2016 and then goes down in 2017 for both companies. So this looks like they're kind of following something going on in the industry, and would have to see the income statement to see what's going on in the industry. Okay. Which company is more efficient? All right, so now we're shifting over from liquidity to efficiency. And you know, before we do that, even though it's not a question, let's look at leverage, okay? So which company has more leverage? And we're going to use the assets to equity ratio as our leverage ratio because that's part of DuPont return on equity. We could use debt to equity, we could use debt as a percentage of total capital, we could use total assets to total liabilities, but we're going to use assets to equity, which is average assets divided by average equity for each year. And we see the higher this number is, the more leverage the company has. And so 3.15 for ITT and 1.45 for ITW. So ITT is much more leveraged. What's the trend in leverage? Well, starts out at 3.28, goes up to 3.94. They borrowed some money, so they start paying some money down, 3.79, 3.15. So their leverage is higher at ITT than ITW, okay, but it's down from the peak. ITW starts at 1.62 and trends down to 1.45. So the companies clearly have a very different philosophy when it comes to liquidity and leverage. ITW believes in having a lot of liquidity. ITT does not. ITW believes in low leverage. ITT believes in high leverage. Okay? Now let's shift over and do efficiency. Which company is more efficient? Well, we'll start with total asset turnover, and we'll compare them, 1.024 and 1.041. It's really close. Really not enough difference between the two companies. And it looks like it's pretty steady for both companies. Okay, pretty steady. So no big differences there. All right, now let's break total asset turnover. So both companies run about the same in terms of efficiency. And let's look at the components of efficiency. How are they managing their accounts receivable? Pretty close. How are they managing their inventory? Fairly close. How are they managing their fixed assets? And again, so ITT is managing their inventory a little bit better than ITW, but not much. And ITW is managing their fixed assets, property, plant, and equipment, a little bit better than ITT, but not by that much. So nothing of note here. Big differences in liquidity and leverage, not big differences in efficiency. So now let's look at profitability. Now notice we're looking at efficiency and leverage and profitability. Those are the three components of return on equity. Profitability and efficiency are the two components of return on assets. So let's look at profitability. Okay, gross profit. So 0.37, 0.38. So very, very close, not any major differences there. Operating margin, 0.1 versus 0.175. What's the difference between operating profit margin and gross profit margin? SG&A and depreciation. Okay? So SG&A and depreciation are taking a much smaller bite out of profits. In other words, their expenses, depreciation and SG&A are lower at ITW than they are at ITT as a percentage of sales. So it is huge. This is a huge swing for ITW to be running, for ITW and ITT to have a similar gross margin. ITW's gross margin is a little bit higher, but their operating margin is much higher. So it's depreciation and SG&A, and we know what SG&A is. That is administrative, non-production overhead or labor costs, non-production, administrative, and depreciation, which is related to property, plant, and equipment. And they are running a higher fixed asset turnover ratio, which indicates that they're generating a little more sales, and their depreciation expense as a percentage of sales is lower. So that explains that. Net profit margin, 6.5%, 11.4%. So again, another big number here versus here. So ITW is a much more profitable company because they're managing their fixed overhead a little bit better, and they're managing their SG&A a whole lot better. And so that explains the difference in profit margin. So we can see that leverage is much higher at ITT, efficiency is about the same, and profitability is much higher at ITW. So let's see how this all translates into the returns. And oh, by the way, let's look. So we've done peer. Let's look at some trend analysis, and we see that the gross profit margin has dropped just a little bit for ITT, and it's risen for ITW. So managers at ITW, they got to figure it out, okay? And operating profit margin has dropped a little bit at ITT, and operating profit margin has increased at ITW. So there's some depreciation and/or SG&A issues at ITT, and would have to ask management what is happening there. Okay, have they kept things under control here? It looks like they really have, and they've let things get out of control here, and we have to understand. We have to talk to management to understand why. Okay, and their net margin has improved, and then it peaked, and then it dropped down a little bit, and it has steadily improved at ITW. All right, now let's look at return on assets, 6.6% versus 11.88%. Much higher, okay, return on assets, and the reason for high return on assets is the higher profit margin. Remember, return on assets is profit margin times efficiency, okay? And efficiency is pretty close, but profit margins are much better. Net profit margin percentage much higher. And so return on assets, ITW is the victor. ITT, now let's look at return on equity, which includes net profit margin percentage, total asset turnover, and leverage, the third component, leverage. And we have 20.88% at ITT and 25.8% at ITW. So ITW wins the game with both return on assets and return on equity, but it's closer, the return on equity is closer between the two, even though ITW is higher. And the reason why ITT makes up some ground on ITW in terms of the return on equity is the higher leverage that they have. All things being equal, ITW is doing a much better job of managing SG&A and managing depreciation expenses and turning over their fixed assets than ITT, and they're maintaining lower leverage, which gives them more flexibility, lower fixed costs, and gives them opportunity to borrow more money. How about this? How about ITW borrows money and buys ITT? They increase their leverage, which will increase their return on equity, and they take their management know-how and apply it to their operating margin. And they would end up, the two companies together would end up being better than the two companies separate. So if I was the CEO or the CFO at ITW, that's what that would be my strategy. I would probably be looking at borrowing money to buy ITT. So there you go. Let's see if we answered. Looks like we answered all the questions there. ITW is in a superior position. All right, so that is homework number 7. We'll take a brief break and we'll move into homework number 8. Peace out. Shalom.